Hi guys, Olive here. Today I'm here to bring you my March 2017 wrap-up and my April TBR. Normally in my wrap-ups, I talk about the books that I read in the order in which I finished them throughout the month. But I desperately do not want to start out this video with a rant, so in order to avoid that, I'm going to start off by talking about the second book I finished in the month, which is The Strays by Emily Biddulph. This book is set in Australia and follows the friendship that develops between two young girls starting from when they are age 8 and then moves on throughout the entirety of their childhood. The friendship that we see develop between our narrator, Lily, and her best friend, Eva, becomes intensely close. And not only are these two girls close, but Lily becomes somewhat integrated in Eva's family. She becomes somewhat like a fourth child to them. Eva's family is extremely sophisticated and has an avant-garde view of life. Her father is a famous painter. Her mother was an artist as well. The family is very well off when it comes to their financial position. And because of that and the fact that they are artists, they invite other friends who are similarly artists to come and live with them so as to not have to worry about finances so they can solely focus on their art. Our narrator, Lily, becomes one of the strays that the Trentham family, Eva's family, takes in. And the more time that goes on, the more interconnected everyone in this household becomes. And sometimes very important lines are getting blurred. This book had absolutely gorgeous writing. The book reminded me a lot of The Interestings by Meg Wolitzer. If you like that book, I think you might like this one. If you liked the portions about a young girl falling in love with a family that's not her own and consistently feeling like an outsider. I would also recommend this book if you were a fan of The Interestings because of the examinations of friendship and how well they bear the weight of the secrets that we keep from each other. It was a very short book, extremely readable, can't recommend it enough. Now that we've started off this video on a more positive note, I feel comfortable going backward and talking about the first book that I finished during the month of March. That was Sorcerer to the Crown by Zen Cho. This was a book that I buddy read with Elena over at Elena Reads Books, and I was nearly positive that I was going to love this book. The premise gave me kind of uprooted vibes, and when it first came out, everyone was talking about it extremely highly, people whose opinions that I trust. So I felt pretty certain I was going to love it. Suffice it to say, I could not have been more disappointed. This is a fantasy novel set in an alternative version of London in the time of Napoleon. There is a black man named Zacharias who has recently taken up the post of Sorcerer Royal, the highest post among the Sorcerer Society. He assumes this post because the previous Sorcerer Royal, who was also his adoptive father, has recently died. The fellow sorcerers, white men, aren't thrilled by this. Meanwhile, the general supply of magic in England is declining for unknown reasons, and women are taught to suppress the magic that they contain within themselves. There is one particular woman that this novel does focus on. Her name is Prunella. When the novel first starts, she is living and working at a school for magical suppression exclusively for women. For reasons of both necessity and ambition, Prunella decides to leave the school and obviously crosses paths with Zacharias. Things go on from there, but even now when I'm recollecting the story for you guys, I'm reminded of how solid a premise this book had. And yet it was completely wasted with the storytelling. It was extremely predictable, awkwardly paced. All of the characters seemed to have extremely nonsensical motivations, which got really irritating. All of the plot development felt overly convenient, to say the least. There was gratuitous romance, there was no character development, and the ending was extremely stupid. So as you can probably tell, this was one that I did not enjoy and absolutely do not recommend. Now moving on in the correct order, the third book I finished was By Blood We Live by Glenn Duncan. Given that this is the third book in a series, I can tell you basically nothing about the plot of this book because even minor things would completely spoil the first one. But I really enjoyed this whole series of books. These being the three of them, The Last Werewolf, Tallulah Rising, and By Blood We Live. It really surprised me that I ended up liking this series as much as I did. If you would have told me before I even picked up the first book that this was a paranormal thriller series, I would have immediately told you I wasn't interested in reading it. But I'm really glad no one did end up telling me that, so I got to experience this series for myself firsthand. It is a highly literary series and has a ton of philosophical musings, and the writing just pulls you through so quickly. As a whole, the series is atmospheric, moody, and definitely dark. If it sounds at all interesting to you, I highly urge you to pick up the first book in the series, The Last Werewolf. If you like that first book and can handle some of the gore and sexual elements to it, then I do believe you will enjoy the whole series. I liked number 2 the best. I felt that books 1 and 2 were slightly stronger than book 3, but I did enjoy all 3 books. You have another rant coming your way because the next book I finished in March was Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. This was a buddy read that I did with Harriet over at Harriet Rosie, and reading this was a part of my challenge for myself to read 12 classic books during the year 2017. I feel like a lot of people assume that with classics you automatically know what the plot is all about, but I very rarely do, so I do like to provide at least a brief summary of what the book is all about. Boiled down to its very essentials, this is the story of the young and beautiful Bathsheba Everdeen and the 3 suitors who try to win her hand. The title of this book refers to its rural setting and points out the irony that although our characters are far removed from the drama of the city, they are still subject to the turmoil of work and relationships. However, I would like to propose a potential subtitle for this book, which is, I've got 99 problems and sheep trying to kill themselves represent about 50% of them. This book does have some beautiful descriptions of nature, but good God was this tedious. I felt on more than one occasion that the sheep in this book might have had a death wish because of how awful Bathsheba was. I've read in some reviews or in some analyses of this book that Bathsheba Everdeen is considered a strong female character. I disagree. She is awful, and not even interestingly so. Most of the time, I find characters who are awful people extremely interesting to read about because normally their behavior is picked apart and analyzed. Even though they are awful, you know why they are awful. Like, you can see their reasoning. Not so in this book. Bathsheba just acts selfishly on every whim and impulse that comes into her brain. She generally treats people like shit because she lacks self-control, but we never find out why. Are there nuances that I am missing from this book? Undeniably so. I would bet money on it. But do I care to go back and find out what those are? Definitely not. The next book I finished I won't talk too much about. It was a short story collection called The Best of Sisters in Crime, edited by Marilyn Wallace. This is a collection of mystery short stories. I read about 1 per day over my lunch break at work, and it was highly enjoyable. Not only do I not read many short stories, but most of these stories were written in the late 80s, and I definitely don't normally read things that were written around that period in time. It was really nice to be able to go outside of my comfort zone and read some short stories every day over lunch. It's a practice I hope to continue. The next to last book that I finished in March was my first 5-star read of the year, and that was Longbourn by Joe Baker. I don't know why it took so long into the year for me to find my first 5-star book, but I'm very relieved that I finally found it. Given that this is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, I am not shocked that I enjoyed it, but I loved it because it was so well done. This is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice told through the eyes of the servants who live and work at Longbourn. I saw some people describing it as Pride and Prejudice meets Downton Abbey, but it has an extremely rich story. It's more than just that. We follow the lives of Mrs. Hill, who is the house manager, and her husband, Mr. Hill, who is the butler. We follow the housemaids, Sarah and Polly, and also the footman, James, whose arrival at Longbourn is a plot point of the beginning of the novel. I will say that the majority of the book does focus on Sarah, one of the housemaids. We see her desire to go out and see more of the world. We also see some of her romantic pursuits. You do get to see events that take place in Pride and Prejudice, of course, but you only get to see firsthand those experiences that would make sense for the servants to have been a part of. But all of the impacts from the plot points of Pride and Prejudice are fully felt throughout the entirety of this novel. This book expands upon the original story of Pride and Prejudice in such an engaging and believable way. Some of the characters from the original story are more fully fleshed out. You see new sides to them in both positive and negative ways, and you also get to see background from the characters prior to the events of Pride and Prejudice, particularly with Mr. and Mrs. Bennet. But seeing the events of the original story through the servants' eyes was extremely refreshing. Like all of the parties that the ladies were going to that they were so excited for, of course, through the eyes of a servant, that means more work, more pressing, more cooking. So those things that meant so much to our main characters in Jane Austen's classic are really just frustrations to our new characters in this book. But I really did enjoy hearing about the lives of the servants and the ways in which their lives didn't revolve around the family, their personalities, their backstories. It was extremely interesting. It was an endearing, well-crafted novel that I think any fan of Pride and Prejudice needs to get their hands on. The very last book that I finished during the month of March was Cannibalism, A Perfectly Natural History by Bill Shutt. If you're interested in my thoughts on this book, I did a full and tipsy book review for it. The link for that will be down in the description box below. I am still currently reading 2 books, the first of which is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. This is my current audiobook listen. I am also working on finishing up Peter the Great by Derek Wilson for Russian History Retreat. I will say that although I love Peter the Great, I love reading about Peter the Great, I'm not the biggest fan of this particular book. I was going through quite a few frustrations at work toward the end of the month, and so it was very hard to convince myself to pick up a book that was also frustrating me. But now that things have calmed down a little bit, I will be returning to this book, finishing it, and then posting the next episode of Russian History Retreat. Now on to all the books that I am planning on reading in April, the first of which is Margaret I by Danielle Dutton. I have heard so many people speak extremely highly of this book. I have been dying to read it. I will also be reading The Tropic of Serpents by Marie Brennan, which is the second book in the Memoirs of Lady Trent series following A Natural History of Dragons. Ever since I bought this book at a library book sale, I've been extremely excited to pick it up. That is The Lily Theater by Lulu Wang. Once I am done with Great Expectations on audiobook, I will be listening to the audiobook for Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. Additionally, I will be reading another book from my young professional TBR, which is Thank You for Arguing by Jay Heinrichs. The Russian History Retreat book for April will be Catherine the Great by Simon Dixon. I cannot wait to do my Russian History Retreat video on her. And the very last thing to do is pick the random book off of my TBR for the month. The first option is The Glorious Heresies by Lisa McInerney. The second book is Caraval by Stephanie Garber. I think that one's a bit too buzzy for me to want to read it at the moment. And the last choice is The Portable Veblen by Elizabeth Mckenzie. This is a difficult choice between option 1 and option 3, but I think I'm going to go with The Glorious Heresies. So those were all the books that I read in March, what I'm still currently reading, and what I'm planning to read in April. I would love to hear from you if you've read any of these books, heard about any of these books, or want to read them now that you've heard about them here. You can get in touch with me in the comment section below or on a variety of places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles are in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.